Good evening, everyone. This week's parsha is Vayakhel-Pekudei. I'd like to dedicate tonight's Drasha in memory of my mother, Mrs. Shalamis Rabinowitz, Shalamis Bas Rav Yaakov Eliezer. So I'm going to begin with a story with Reb Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev. So the famous Hasidic Rebbe, Reb Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev, it was the night of Kol Nidre, and everyone was waiting to begin. And Reb Levi Yitzchak motioned to the chazan, to the leader, that he shouldn't begin yet. He's not ready. And everybody was wondering, what was the delay? Then, at a certain point, Reb Levi Yitzchak turns to his shams, who was attendant, and asks him, is Reb Matal from Zhetomia here? That's for a certain chassid, for a certain person, Reb Matal of Zhetomia. The shamas looked around, saw that he was there, and Reb Levi Yitzchak told him, please ask him to come over. So Matal came over, and Reb Levi Yitzchak began to question him. Tell me, do you not live on land owned by a certain Gentile landowner? And Matal responded, yes. Does he not own a dog? Said the Rebbe. Yes, Rebbe, he owns a very fine dog. Still not knowing why Reb Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev is asking him about his landowner's dog. Do you know how much he paid for the dog? Reb Levi Yitzchak asked. I certainly do, answered Matal. The landowner said it was a special dog with a distinguished pedigree and that he paid 400 rubles for it. That was a lot of money in those days for anything. When Reb Levi Yitzchak heard that amount, he was very happy, and he said, 400 rubles, gavaldik, that's fantastic. And he then motioned to the chazan to begin the Kol Nidre service. So anybody who was privy to this incident was very curious to know what was going on. And after Ma'ariv was over, they approached Reb Levi Yitzchak and asked him what had happened. So Reb Levi Yitzchak told him the following story. There was a malamed, a teacher, a tutor. In Europe for many, many years, there was no standardized school system. And there was someone, a malamed, a teacher, who would be the one who would be hired to teach children. So there was once a malamed, a tutor, that came to our town, and he spent time tutoring in town away from his family who lived in a different place in order to make enough money to repay his many debts that he accumulated at home. After a while, he earned enough money to repay his debts and even have money to support his family for the rest of the year. On his way home, he stopped over at an inn, and at the inn overnight, the money was stolen from him. When he woke up in the morning, he was hysterical and began screaming and crying about how hard he had worked, and it was all going to vain. And the landowner, Matal's landowner, was staying at the same inn. And when he heard the commotion, he asked what was going on. And he listened to the malamed, to the teacher's broken-hearted tale of how he worked so hard to make money to pay for his debts and everything. And the landowner took pity on him, and he took out 400 rubles and gave it to this man to pay his debts and to support his family. Okay. So Reb Levi Yitzchak said to his Hasidim, as Kol Nidre began, I became concerned about the far-reaching effects of that episode in heaven. We stand before Hashem in judgment, and we are asking for his mercy. Do we deserve that Hashem should look at us favorably? Let's ask ourselves, are we deserving of his favor? Did any of us do any unusual act of kindness that would stand in our behalf? If a non-Jew could perform such an exemplary act of kindness, Hashem's nation, the Jewish people, should do no less. Can we say that we did? So Levi Yitzchak Berdichev was concerned that this act done by this non-Jew could actually create what's called a kitrig, a complaint against the Jewish people on the day of judgment that have they ever done such a thing? If they should be able to do such an act also. Have they done such a thing? But then Rabbi Yitzchak concluded, but then I remembered the dog. The dog. And when I found out how much money he paid for this dog, then already I realized that that's not going to be a problem. Because if this person could pay 400 rubles for a dog, then that means that money doesn't mean that much to him. And therefore, the merit isn't as great. We have nothing to worry about. End of story. Now, I would explain, or I would take the following out of the story. I think there's a very strong argument to make that it's easier for a person to spend money on himself, even for a pet, than to spend his money on someone else. And therefore, there's no question the fact that he was willing to give so much money for this poor man was a very great act of kindness. Nonetheless, if this person would spend so much money on a dog, then that means that when he wants something, money's not an object. Money doesn't mean that much to him when he wants something. And yes, the act of kindness was tremendous, but that's what he wanted to do. And that's what he wanted to do, then he would spend money on it, just like he would spend money on the pet that he wanted so badly. The full merit of an act of kindness comes when it involves sacrifice on our part. When we give up from something that's so important to us to help someone else, that carries the full impact, that carries the full merit of the act of kindness that we've done. Now, this week's parsha, the Torah tells us the following. When the Jewish people were bringing the donations for the construction of the Mishkan, so we read in Perek Lamed Hey Pasuk Chaf Beis, chapter 35, verse 22. Vayavoyu ha'anoshim al hanoshim. I'm going to translate these words literally. And the men came on the women. Kol divlev, all those who were donating from the heart. Heiviu chach vanezim v'taras v'chumaz. They brought all these different pieces of jewelry. Kol klizav, all vessels of gold. V'cholish asher heinav tivasav l'Hashem, and any man who offered an offering of gold to God. So clearly we're talking about here donating jewelry. So Rashi, in his commentary on the words, Vayavayu ha'anoshim al hanoshim, and the men came, like we said, translated on the women, it doesn't mean on the women. It means im hanoshim usmuchim lahem, with the women close by them. So al hanoshim, on the women, means with the women. That when the women came to donate, the men were there with them. Why? So the commentary of the Sisacham explains, one may not accept a contribution from a woman without her husband's permission unless it's for a small amount. Therefore, it says the men came with the women. Typically, the money that a woman has is going to be belonging to her husband. And therefore, if she wants to give a large contribution, we have to make sure that the husband is okay with it. That's the halacha. And many times the assumption could be that he is. But here in this situation, the situation called for where they were giving up these very precious jewelry, they couldn't just come on their own. They had to have their husbands coming with them to show that they're okay with the donation. Now, the Targum Onkelos, the Aramaic translation of the Torah of Onkelos, which you'll find on the side of every Chumash, which is not just a translation. Very often, his translation leads us to having understandings, a certain understanding of the verse. He says like this: "Umayisan gavraya al neshaya." The men came on the women. So he doesn't change al to im with. He keeps it with on to on. And therefore, the understanding of Onkelos actually is, at least the way Ramesha Feinstein understood, that Onkelos is translating, and the men came on the women means the men came with the things that were on the women, excuse me, which were these different pieces of jewelry the Torah mentions. The men came on the women's, the men came with the ornaments, with the jewelry on the women. Anyone who was donating from their heart, all these things. That's what the Onkelos is understanding to mean. Onkelos understood to mean they came on the women. I mean, they came on the women. It means that they came with the things on the women. Whoever wanted to donate, donated these pieces of jewelry. So that means that when the women came with the husbands to donate, they came wearing the jewelry. The men came on the women with the things on the women, which were the ornaments that they, from their heart, donated. So the question is, why do they have to come wearing it? I mean, basically, if they're planning on donating it, they should bring it. Why were they wearing it? So Moshe Feinstein explains that the reason why they were wearing it is because they wanted to make it very clear that the jewelry that they were donating wasn't jewelry that they weren't wearing anyway, especially in light of the fact that the Jewish people had taken so much wealth and gold and silver from Egypt and from the splitting of the Red Sea, as we mentioned previously. They had plenty of stuff. So if they would bring this jewelry, it could be understood as, well, this is the stuff that this is the jewelry we don't wear, so we're donating it. And therefore they came wearing the jewelry to show that, no, this is our jewelry. We like this jewelry. This is the jewelry we want to wear as long as we can until it's time to donate it to the Mishkan. Because although it is so precious to us, it's our jewelry that we love wearing, it's more important for us to give it towards the construction of the Mishkan. So they wore it to show that this wasn't just something that they didn't need that they were donating. It was something that they loved and they used it, and they wanted to use it to the last minute. But they were going to give it towards the construction of the Mishkan because that was more important. They had their priorities in life straight. What was more important? To give this to the Mishkan. But it was something that was very important to them. It surely involved sacrifice to do so. That's the point. The point is to bring out here that when they were donating to the Mishkan, they weren't just donating something they didn't need. They were donating something that was very important to them. Nonetheless, what was more important was to donate towards the construction of the Mishkan for divine presence to rest amongst the Jewish people. And this is the lesson of whatever mitzvah involves sacrifice, is that a mitzvah in its fullest involves when we have to give up something important for us to do the mitzvah, whether it is tzedakah, whether it's kindness, whether it's to study Torah, that a person, is giving up time to study Torah and he maybe be able to do other things with that time that could bring him other benefits. But nonetheless, the lesson here is that we're ready to give that up for the service of Hashem because that is the most important thing in life. And the fullest merit of an act comes when we're ready to give up something that means something to us, but we give it up anyway for the mitzvah. I was thinking, there are times where we donate clothing to people who are needy. And what clothing do we donate? The ones that we don't need anymore, right? The ones that our kids grew out of, right? The hand-me-downs. Those things we don't need it anymore. Okay, we give it to a charity. We give it to people who need, which is a great thing. That's the best thing you can do with that clothing. But would we be willing to actually give up clothing for a person in need, clothing that we could actually use and that means something to us? It's something just to think about the fact about how willing are we to give up from ourselves in order to help someone, in order to do any mitzvah. Because the full impact of a mitzvah, the full impact, the full merit that comes from a mitzvah is a mitzvah that's done with sacrifice. That is the greatest way that we can do a mitzvah. Again, whether it's tzedakah, whether it's helping someone, whether it's studying Torah, it could be any mitzvah. The real way to fulfill a mitzvah, or the way that we show Hashem that we're serious about his service, is we're ready to sacrifice for his service. And with that carries the full merit that we need to receive his mercy and blessing. Have a wonderful Shabbos.